is the top story. As the congressional impeachment probe into Donald Trump is accelerating with new witnesses and new corroboration of the Ukraine plot and a new court ruling late today against the Trump administration, which now orders the Justice Department to hand over redacted materials from the Mueller probe to House Democrats who sued for it. As all that heat is getting turned up on the Trump White House, Donald Trump's handpicked Attorney General Bill Barr is making good on Donald Trump's demands, several of which are illegal. If you take Donald Trump at his word, these are the demands to, quote, investigate the investigators. Now, for months, Mr. Barr has overseen a review of the original Russia and then Mueller probe. So that's something you may have heard about, and that's going through materials and talking to people, etc. This is different. Tonight, we are wading into new territory for the first time because the report is that probe has turned criminal, which means new powers, new threats, the prospect of new punishments against the very people who were investigating Donald Trump and his campaign and his aides. An investigation which, we have to note before we go any further, famously found a crime spree by the likes of Manafort and Gates and Cohen. And that is the context for this New York Times blockbuster. Bill Barr's Justice Department opening a criminal inquiry into its own Russia investigation. Now, I'm going to leave this up for you because just look at those two words, its own. Its own Russia investigation. That is where the obvious conflict begins, raising questions that are potentially bad for Trump and Barr. How does the DOJ credibly investigate the DOJ? Who exactly is the target for a crime here? Is it Mueller? Is it Rosenstein, who Trump appointed? Is it Sessions? Is it Barr? Those are, of course, the senior DOJ people who oversaw the probe. Barr is the one who finished it. Now, he is investigating if the probe itself caused crimes. Is he going to judge his own performance in this process that he and Trump now say includes potential crimes? Well, the answer here is suspicious, right? Because here is how the New York Times carefully refers to those problems. Quote, Barr's move creates an unusual situation in which the Justice Department is conducting a criminal investigation into itself. Of course, under the rules, you're never supposed to investigate yourself. That's why there are recusals, which everyone remembers had Jeff Sessions step aside. That's why there are special counsels, like Bob Mueller. They are appointed when the DOJ's leadership has a conflict for a needed investigation. Now, of course, few people think Mr. Barr is using this to actually investigate himself or his friends and allies. The evidence points to something more like an abuse of law enforcement powers to target rivals. And here's how that same New York Times article reports this, noting the news may raise alarms that Trump is using the Justice Department to go after his perceived enemies. Mr. Trump fired James Comey and has long assailed other top law enforcement and intelligence officials and has made clear he sees the typically independent Justice Department as a tool to be wielded against his political enemies. That itself may sound harsh. That's just an objective report based on the public facts. And as with the Ukraine scandal, some of the most damning evidence against Trump about his intent and his goals here comes from Trump. Just today, he confessed those goals again.
Investigate the investigators, whether it's Strzok and Page, whether it's Clapper, and whether it's Comey and all of these people, because terrible things went on for our country. And we have a great attorney general, highly prestigious man, a very honorable man, and they've been looking at it for a long time.
And the New York Times is reporting the Justice Department is reviewing these people inside the Mueller probe for potential crimes. That means the Justice Department has to suspect or believe or claim it can prove the evidence of crimes or crimes were committed as part of this probe. So again, who committed the alleged crime here, if there was a crime? Is it Rosenstein? Is it Mueller? Is it Comey or their staff? No one is suggesting they would automatically be above scrutiny, but the president already gave away the game. And this is so important, and that's why I'm spending time on this with you tonight. As this Congress considers the existential question of trying to remove a sitting president from office over allegations of abusing his power to demand investigations of a political rival, because this new criminal probe follows the arc of Trump demanding investigations into his rivals, real and perceived.
If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation.
Who specifically are you accusing of treason?
If you look at Comey, if you look at McCabe, If you look at probably people higher than that.
This was an illegal takedown that failed. And hopefully somebody's going to be looking at the other side.
Did you discuss Joe Biden, his son, or his family with the leader?
It doesn't matter what I discuss, but I will say this. Somebody ought to look into Joe Biden's statement.
Now, legally, candidates, politicians have all kinds of latitude for rhetoric, and that's fine. I want to be very clear with you. The news tonight shows this is way beyond rhetoric. The pieces are falling into place from D.C. to Kiev, and you can see the arc of Donald Trump's plots working against his rivals or detractors. You can also see how his overkill in these quests can sometimes backfire, and it's caused his presidency's gravest legal woes. I want to report on both in this breakdown for you. The public targeting of his perceived rivals, one by one. You have James Comey, who Trump pressed to favor his friends like Mike Flynn and go after Trump's detractors like Clinton and journalists. Now, remember, Comey resisted those requests, and then Trump fired him, and then turned the same tactic against Comey, as you just saw, demanding he be investigated or indicted for crimes. Then there's the FBI official who literally replaced Comey to run the FBI, Andrew McCabe. And we know Trump's DOJ investigated him already this year, using so many questionable tactics they actually were rebuked by a federal judge. They've also faced demands to clear up whether a grand jury rejected an attempted indictment of McCabe for some comments he made in 2016. Now, those are Trump's public demands to go after some of the top leaders of the FBI. This news is that there is now a DOJ probe into the Russia investigation, which means the new probe can still be deployed again against Comey and McCabe. The Russia probe, right? Those were the people in charge then. And Donald Trump clearly thinks Bill Barr is helping do what he asked for. That adds context to Donald Trump invoking Barr in the same breath as Giuliani in the plot that has brought him so close to impeachment. Which brings us to another attempted abuse of the investigations to go after rivals, the Bidens. Donald Trump brazenly telling a foreign government that Barr could help them do that, a kind of outsourced investigation, and Ukraine has gone along with part of that. Now, if you look at any one of these cases in isolation, and hypothetically, it could look more defensible. When you take them all together and you see this incriminating pattern, Donald Trump systematically demanding the government's gravest powers to investigate, to detain, to incarcerate, be deployed against the people who've served in government, to run the probes that he opposes, or, as you see there in red, Joe Biden, to dare run against him in the next election, they shall all be targeted. And so now, amidst everything else that's happening, and obviously there's a lot happening, you have the confirmation that DOJ has the Russia investigators under investigation inside the U.S., while a top Trump rival faces a similar process abroad as demanded by Donald Trump. So I've laid this all out because it's important to take it together. What does it all mean? Well, first, Donald Trump's no longer just attacking the rule of law by demanding the probes of his rivals. His DOJ is going along with it. When people tried that in the Nixon era, it ended with some pretty senior Nixon appointees in jail. Now, that's the straightforward part. There's a second revelation that I have to share with you that you have to understand here if you're keeping an eye on the potential impeachment of the president. It has become common, especially among Trump defenders, to try to separate Trump's Russia problem and his Ukraine scandal. And the refrain is often that, well, look, Democrats couldn't get him on Russia, so now they're trying to impeach him over Ukraine. But tonight, with this reporting, more than ever before, this New York Times bombshell shows that for Trump, these are not two different problems. It's all part of the same single obsessive activity, allegedly abusing government power to go after rivals. That's what Trump did in firing Comey over Russia, which happened. And that's what Trump tried to do in demanding his staff kneecap the Mueller probe, which ultimately did not happen. But it's also what Trump did in demanding Ukraine go after the Bidens, which did happen. So what does this mean? Well, sometimes he gets the outcome he demanded. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he gets the outcome and it blows up in his face. I mean, it's pretty remarkable when we step back and consider that the two acts which have haunted Trump's presidency the most are times when he was actually effective. Firing Comey, which brought him Mueller, and demanding this Biden probe, which brought him closer than ever to impeachment than anything else. And thanks to the whistleblowers, we know these moves were not separated by any time at all. Donald Trump watched Bob Mueller testify before Congress about firing Comey and the evidence of Trump's obstruction and thought that whole thing was wrapping up. And now we know the very next day, he pushed Ukraine to go team up with Bill Barr on going after Biden. And before I turn to our experts, I want to tell you something else. When that story first broke, you may recall there were these leaks that seemed pretty friendly to Bill Barr that he was, quote, angry to be mentioned or pulled into that plot. But tonight, Bill Barr is the one driving the ultimate Trump plot, not in Ukraine, but right here in the United States. Investigate the investigators and see if they can get away with it. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.